When you sit the Az103 exam, you're going to be expected to know how to deploy a virtual network as well as a subnet on the virtual network. In this lesson, we're going to deploy a virtual network called vNet Az1 as well as a default subnet called Subnet Az1. This virtual network will host some resources later on in the course. On the screen here, you can see my Azure dashboard. I'm going to deploy everything in the Az103 exam resource group. The resources that you see in the resource group right now are what comprise our simulated on-prem environment that we're going to use later on as well. So to deploy a virtual network, what we're going to do here is click on Create a Resource. Now we can create a virtual network in a couple different ways. We can browse to networking and then virtual network, or we can search for virtual network in the search bar. So let's select virtual network from the results list here. When deploying a virtual network, there's two options right out of the gate: the software plan that we need to select and the deployment model. You can see here we only have one choice for the software plan. But for the deployment model, we can select from either Resource Manager or Classic. The Classic deployment model is essentially obsolete at this point. There will be a point where you can't even deploy anything in the Classic model, so everything goes in the Resource Manager. So let's go ahead and click Create here. And what we're going to do is give our virtual network a name. So we'll call this vNet Az1. Now, if we hover over the icon for address space, this tells us that we have to specify the virtual network's address range in CIDR notation. Now, the address space we're going to use for our new virtual network is 192.168.0.0/16. Now, when deploying a virtual network, we need to tell Azure what subscription to deploy it to and into what resource group to deploy it. We only have our pay-as-you-go subscription here, and the resource group we're going to use is the Az103 exam. We have a choice of where we can deploy the resource from a location perspective. Essentially, these are data centers throughout Azure. We're going to leave Central US as our option. When you deploy a virtual network, you need to specify a default subnet. For our subnet here, we're going to call it Subnet Az1. Now you'll see in the address range box, we have a little exclamation point here. If we hover over it, it tells me that the subnet address range is not contained within the address space for the virtual network. So we look at the virtual network here, we're looking at an address space for the entire virtual network of 192.168. The address range down here that it defaulted to is a 10.1.0.0. When you deploy a subnet, the address range for the subnet needs to fall within the space of the parent virtual network. Since 10.1.0.0 doesn't fall within 192.168.0.0, Azure's complaining about it. So what we're going to do for this subnet is create an address range of 192.168.1.0/24. So now our address range for the subnet that we're defining now falls within the address space of the parent virtual network. At this point, we have a couple different options left to configure. We can configure DDoS protection, service endpoints, and a firewall. The basic DDoS protection comes with Azure and is no cost. If we hover over the little icon here, we can see that DDoS basic protection is integrated into the platform by default, so they don't charge you for it. However, the Azure DDoS standard protection is a premium paid service. It provides enhanced DDoS capabilities via adaptive tuning, attack notification, and all of the other fun stuff you see here in the icon pop-out. If we click Learn More here, we can see more about the DDoS protection standard offering. And I suggest you read about it after you've completed this course. You're not going to pass the Az103 by taking a single course on Udemy. Anyone who tells you that is probably fibbing a little bit. You're going to need to, in addition, take courses, also read about these individual offerings, and even have some stick time on them. So let's bounce back here. So we're going to leave the DDoS protection set to basic. And then we have to configure endpoints and a firewall. If we hover over the endpoints icon and click Learn More, we can see more about the endpoints. The vNet service endpoints essentially extend the virtual network private address space and the identity of the vNet to the Azure services over direct connection. As you can see here, what endpoints do is allow you to secure critical Azure service resources to only the virtual networks. Traffic that travels from your vNet to Azure will always remain on the Azure backbone network. And you can see all the different options here. We don't need any service endpoints here, and as a matter of fact, and you can see here if we enable it, we can select different services to work with the service endpoint. We're not even using any of these services, so it wouldn't even make sense to turn it on. So we'll keep it disabled. And then firewall is another offering. It's a cloud-based offering that protects the Azure Virtual Network. We're not going to use a firewall because we're going to use a network security group later on to protect this network. So we'll leave the firewall turned off. However, if you hover over and click Learn More, you can see it gives tutorials on how to deploy firewall, gives you explanations of what Azure Firewall is, all that fun stuff that you should be reading once you've completed this course. So let's bounce back into Create a Virtual Network, and we'll leave our firewall disabled. So let's go ahead and create our network. And what I'm going to do here is pin it to my dashboard so I can access it more easily throughout the course. So at this point, we have our first virtual network deployed. We can select address space here in the blade for the virtual network and see that we have the address space defined for it. And then we can select subnets to see the subnet Az1 that we deployed as part of the virtual network. We can also see the number of available addresses on our subnet as well. Later on, we'll get into configuring DNS servers, peering, and all that other fun stuff. But for now, let's call it a wrap, and I'll see you over in the next lesson.